This is a short video on the reproductive system slides that you have. We'll first start with the ovary. The ovary here has a number of structures that we'll go through. This is the edge of the ovary. The first layer the fibrous layer that you see here, is the tunica albuginea. The word alb means white. And so this would be a white fibrous material. And if we go in from that, we see that we have some of the structures that are developing, which are the follicles. And on this particular slide, it's in an area where we have a group of what are called primordial follicles. Basically, it has an oocyte that you see here and a very thin layer of cells around it. I'll show you another picture, a little bit better picture of these primordial follicles here. So you can see that this is the oocyte and the nucleus of the oocyte. And we have the very, very thin layer of cells that you see out here. And when these develop, let me show you one more picture here. I think it's, yeah, right here shows you the primordial follicles all grouped together on the edge here. We have a germinal epithelium here that gave rise to these primordial follicles when the baby was still developing. And by the time the baby is born, she will have all of these primordial follicles. And once the female reaches puberty, around age 12 or so, then these primordial follicles some of them will start to develop into other follicles, getting ready to release an egg every 28 days. So here, developing one of these follicles can be seen developing as a primordial follicle. A primordial follicle, let's see if this is labeled on the side here, yeah, has a nice strong thick layer of cells around it. These are follicular cells, and they're going to be eventually supporting that oocyte, and they're going to be providing some hormones. They're going to be secreting hormones, estrogen primarily, for further development. Once the oocyte or the follicle starts to develop, it produces what is known as a primary follicle. Let's see if I can get back to this one here. Yeah, this would be the primary follicle. And if we go back a slide here, we see that we've added some layers here. It's become thicker, and it has now become what is called a secondary follicle. A secondary follicle has another layer on it. Once development has continued, then we get into we start to see a more developed follicle, which is called the tertiary follicle. And the tertiary follicle, you can see, is quite large, and it has many, many layers of follicular cells. There are names. We could learn some names around the developing oocyte, these cells here, and I think one of these slides has the names, but we're not going to be doing that here. We're not going to get into that much detail. This shows you two of the layers here, the zona pellucida and the corona radiata. But primarily, we're interested in this oocyte here that's developing and has 23. Well, will have 23 chromosomes in the middle there. So let's go on down to another picture here that shows another ovarian follicle or tertiary follicle or Graafian follicle. And we have the layer, the container or the space in the middle here is filled with what is called a follicular fluid. This is the follicular cavity, or also known as antrum. Let's see if I can provide a little pin here. Let's see. No, I guess I can't. Hold on a second. Okay, we're going to try this again. See if I can get, there we go. I'm going to see if I can, yep. So this here, this area here is the space is called an antrum. And it's filled with follicular fluid. And let me erase that. So those are the follicles that we have in the ovary, and going to return back to this here so I can move my slides. Once the follicle has produced is mature and it's ready, let's say this oocyte is ready to be released. It has gone through meiosis to the secondary oocyte stage, but it's not quite done yet. It's going to have to wait for the sperm to complete its meiosis. But anyway, we can take a look at something that develops right after this is released. Once the ovary has released the oocyte and it's traveling down the oviduct or the fallopian tube, and making its way to the uterus, another structure called the corpus luteum is developed from this empty, if you wish, tertiary follicle. And this then is called the corpus luteum, and it fills in with a yellow material. This yellow material produces primarily progesterone. Progesterone is the hormone that is going to tell the lining of the uterus to remain intact, just in case. We should have a fertilized egg and then produce an embryo. So the corpus luteum has an important function in maintaining the uterine lining. The Graafian follicle or tertiary follicle, its job is to make sure that the estrogen, as it's developing, the estrogen being produced is going to produce, that hormone is going to cause the uterine lining to build up. Okay, so that is the female ovary. Here's a little quiz here for you. What would be this type of a follicle here? What stage would you call this? If you said primary follicle, you would be correct. You can see there's a nice strong single layer of follicular cells that are around this developing oocyte. Now we move on into the testis, and the testis has what we call seminiferous tubules. The testis is actually a lot of tubules that are highly coiled that produce the eventually to become the sperm cells. So this is a seminiferous tubule. You'll remember from maybe the endocrine system that we have interstitial endocrinocytes on the outside here. Here's a big patch of them. That's producing testosterone, which help to mature the sperm and support the development. But we're interested today in looking at the cells that are developing from the seminiferous tubule. Again, remember these cells are going to be undergoing meiosis, just like they did in the ovary, the oocyte, in order to produce an egg or an ovum. These cells are going to be producing spermatozoa or sperm cells. And so the seminiferous tubule, um, the way to learn the stages of the cells is to understand that the seminiferous tubule here, as things develop, they develop from the outside and they work their way in. And so they keep dividing in order to produce the sperm. So you would see, I mean, generally speaking, and it might be hard to see all these cells at this point, but you would see on the outside the first stage of cells. And let me see if I can get my pointer here again. There we go. These first layer of cells, such as the ones that are hanging out right along this edge here, right along this edge, these are called spermatogonium. Oh, well, plural would be spermatogonia. And I'm following the list that you have. Um, if you're an anatomy student, I'm following the list. If you're a Bio 4B student, you don't have, well, you don't have a list per se, but you have those structures in your lab manual. So on the testis here, as we move in, the spermatogonia are going to undergo mitosis. Oh, well, that's okay. We can do that. And mitosis is going to produce a primary, and I'll use this for primary, spermatocyte. And I'll find a slide that these are labeled in so I don't have to keep writing these. Spermatocyte. There we go. And so as these produce primary spermatocytes, which this would probably be one right here, the spermatocyte then undergoes meiosis, and the first division of meiosis, and the first division then produces a secondary spermatocyte, and then that keeps maturing into another division, a second division in meiosis, if you remember your meiosis, and then that produces a spermatid. That's where we're headed here. Spermatid. Okay, so our spermatids are going to be this patch of cells right here. They're going to be these here. And when we start to, what's going to happen is the spermatid then is going to produce a nice little head and a tail, a midpiece, and so forth. And so then that will become a sperm cell. Okay, or spermatozoa. Okay, so I'm going to get out of my pen. Oops, I'm going to erase this before I move on here. And get out of my pen here. Okay, so, and then in the middle of the seminiferous tubule is this lumen. And so the sperm cells are going to be dropped off in this and detach into this lumen and then work their way to another part of the testis that's another coiled tube on the outside, which is called a epididymis. So I'm going to go down a slide here. These are sort of named for us. And here's our seminiferous tubule. Here's the lumen of the tubule. And the tubule is consisted of these huge cells that sort of support their cytoplasm, or the cell membrane of those cells wrap around each of these developing spermatocytes. And those cells are called Sertoli, or nurse cells, Sertoli cells. And so you can see the nuclei of this particular Sertoli cell. Notice that the Sertoli cell nuclei are different looking. They're sort of oblong and they're lighter. They're not, excuse me, they're not dividing. So they don't have the dark chromosomal structures that you see in these other cells. So they're supportive cells. And um, the cells that are dividing are the spermatocytes. And so here you can see this first layer of cells, the primary spermatocytes. You can see their chromosomes. And as they continue to divide, they produce secondary spermatocytes. It's a little difficult to see the difference on the slide. And then eventually they mature into spermatids, which I don't, yeah, there it is, the spermatids here. Okay, there's our name. And the spermatids then develop into spermatozoa or sperm cells. And so you can see the little heads here. We would like to see the flagella. That would be indicative of the sperm cells. And so I'm going to go down here to show you a diagram of what is happening here. We have our spermatogonium that we mentioned at first. We have our Sertoli cell, and I'm going to trace the Sertoli cell so you can see this, the nurse cell, the Sertoli cell. Comes all the way around here. You see how it wraps around all this stuff here? Continually wraps around, comes around here. That's one Sertoli cell. It's got mitochondria and endoplasmic reticulum and what you can see of its nucleus. And you can see the another Sertoli cell here. And you can see there's a spermatogonium that mitoses into one cell stays here and the other cell moves on as a primary spermatocyte. This is a diploid, 2N, and this will then undergo meiosis. Primary spermatocyte in the first division of meiosis produces a secondary spermatocyte, reduces the number of chromosomes. Now this is haploid. This has 23 chromosomes. This has 46 if we're looking at a human. And then these secondary spermatocytes then divide by meiosis, the second division, and that produces the spermatids. And the spermatids go on to develop a head and a flagellum, and eventually they will be called spermatozoa or sperm cells. And then we're in the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. There's a nice picture from a textbook that shows you the diagrammatic diagram of the actual division of the what's called spermatogenesis. And over here we see a nice little drawing of what the cells would look like. And I think I have some more for you here. See, Sertoli cells. These are two seminiferous tubules butting up against each other. Here's a lumen of one. There's the lumen of the other one. There's our characteristic nuclei for the Sertoli cells. These darker cells on the outside, the rim here are spermatogonia. There's our primary spermatocytes developing. And you can see some spermatids here. I can't see any good secondary spermatocytes on this particular view. There's some spermatids on the end. And you can see all the flagella all in this area from the sperm cells. And here's another close-up here. The blue arrow is showing you a spermatogonium. These are spermatocytes, primary and secondary. And then we have our not very good view for spermatids, but we do have a lot of sperm cells in the middle here. And another view of a nice seminiferous tubule. Again, outside are the spermatogonia. Then we have our primary spermatocytes, probably secondary spermatocytes as we get closer to the lumen. And then we have a spermatid right here. And we have our sperm cells, at least the flagella of the sperm cells in the middle there. Another view here. You can practice on that one. You can see the cells get smaller as they get to the middle. They're undergoing meiosis. And I think, yeah, that's it. So I hope that helps you to learn the female and male reproductive organs that produce the gametes or reproductive structures, cells, reproductive cells.